The neon glow of the 24-hour diner flickered over her tired face as she balanced a dented paper cup of weak coffee in one hand and the torn straps of her backpack in the other. Her shoes were worn through at the toes, and every step on the wet pavement sent a shiver up her spine. She glanced at the eviction notice curling on her apartment door in her mind, even though she hadn't the energy to check it again tonight. Hunger gnawed at her ribs, a hollow ache she had learned to live with, and yet she kept walking. Somewhere, she hoped, there might be someone who didn't just see her as a scraggly woman in tattered clothes, someone who might look past the exhaustion in her eyes. Could I clean your mansion for just a plate of food?" she murmured under her breath, the words tasting like desperation. Her lips trembled as she rehearsed the line again, imagining how it might sound to a stranger who owned more wealth than she could ever count. In the distance, the massive gates of Whitmore Estates gleamed in the streetlights, cold and untouchable, like a fortress separating her from a life that seemed impossibly bright. Inside, the grand hallway of the mansion sparkled with marble floors and chandeliers that glimmered like captured starlight. She hesitated at the threshold, holding herself rigid despite the rain dripping from her coat. "Excuse me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. A man in a tailored suit looked up from his tablet. "Yes?" His tone was polite, but measured like a wall of ice. I was wondering if—" She swallowed, forcing the words past the knot in her throat. "If maybe you needed some cleaning done? I could work for a meal?" The man blinked, his eyes narrowing slightly as though trying to process her. Then a voice from behind, soft yet commanding, interrupted. "Darcy?" The words made her freeze. A woman stepped forward, tall and elegant, wearing a deep red coat over fitted jeans. Her heels clicked softly on the marble as she approached, and for a moment, Darcy felt like the grimy streets had never existed. "I think you're lost," the woman said, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her gaze. I'm not lost," Darcy said, her hands fidgeting at the straps of her backpack. I need work. And food?" Her eyes darted around, trying to hide the way her stomach clenched painfully. The wealthy woman studied her for a long moment, a slow, almost cinematic smirk curling her lips. "For food, huh?" she asked. "You really think anyone would let you in their house for just a meal?" Darcy bit back the bitter retort and instead nodded, letting her gaze fall to the floor. Her hair, matted at the ends from the rain, fell across her face, and she brushed it back nervously. She could feel the weight of her exhaustion pressing her down, yet something in the woman's eyes made her hold on to the thread of hope she barely dared to acknowledge. "I'll tell you what," the woman finally said, her voice softer now, almost conspiratorial. "You start tomorrow. 8 in the morning. Wear whatever you have." "We'll see how it goes," Darcy's heart raced. "Really?" she whispered, the word trembling out. I can't, thank you, I can't believe it." Her throat tightened so much she could barely swallow. The woman just smiled, and that smile was enough to make Darcy feel like maybe she could breathe again. The next morning, Darcy arrived at Whitmore Estates before the sun had fully risen, the street still glistening from overnight rain. Her jacket was damp, her shoes puddled, and the backpack she carried looked heavier than usual, weighed down by the hope she dared not voice aloud. She was met at the door by the woman in red, who extended a hand with an easy confidence that made Darcy feel like she was walking into another world entirely. Inside, the mansion's grandeur was overwhelming. Rooms stretched with ceilings so high they almost disappeared, chandeliers reflecting light in hundreds of directions, polished floors that seemed to swallow her steps. Darcy moved quickly, dusting and polishing with care, her body aching from the unfamiliar exertion. Her hands were raw, her back stiff, but every so often she caught a glimpse of the woman watching her from the grand staircase, notebook in hand, observing rather than judging. Hours passed, And just as Darcy was starting to feel the strain of exhaustion, a tray appeared in front of her. Simple food, yes, but rich in warmth and aroma. She had eaten scraps from convenience stores for weeks, counting coins at self-checkouts just to get something, anything, to fill her stomach. Now she sat on a chair that seemed impossibly soft, savoring every bite, the taste almost overwhelming. The woman in red stood nearby, casually sipping a cup of coffee, her gaze unflinching but not unkind. "Not bad for a first day," the woman said finally, and Darcy's stomach lurched, not from hunger, but from the unexpected kindness.
"You have a good eye for details, and
"You carry yourself with dignity, even in—" She glanced at Darcy's worn shoes. Circumstances like these," Darcy swallowed hard, feeling tears prick her eyes.
I don't know how to thank you," she said, voice cracking. I've never had anyone see me like that." The woman's smile softened, but then a faint frown crossed her brow.
"Don't get too comfortable yet," she said. "There's more work to be done."
"And some parts of this mansion—"
"Well, they're not as forgiving as others," Darcy nodded, heart hammering. She understood the meaning beneath the words. There would be challenges, judgment, obstacles. But for the first time in a long time, she also understood that she might have a chance, maybe even a future. Later, as the evening shadows stretched across the mansion walls, Darcy paused in a grand hallway, catching her reflection in a polished mirror. The rain outside tapped insistently against the windows, echoing her own nervous heartbeat. And then she saw him leaning in the doorway, tall, impeccably dressed, his eyes wide, frozen, as if he had stepped into a moment he had never anticipated. The air between them seemed to hum with something unspoken, something that could tilt the course of everything. Darcy's lips trembled, not from fear, but from the intensity of being seen. And in that suspended heartbeat, everything felt as fragile and as possible as the next breath. The silence in that hallway was heavy, stretched thin by the way his gaze clung to her. Darcy's fingers twisted against the fraying strap of her backpack, her throat dry. She wasn't sure if she should lower her eyes or stand her ground. But the man, his suit pressed, his hair carefully styled, his polished shoes clicking softly as he stepped closer, didn't look away. "Darcy," he said, his voice deep, steady but not cold, more like disbelief threaded with something else. "It's been—"
"Years." Her breath caught. "You know me?"
The words left her lips before she could stop them. The woman in red, who had been lingering near the staircase, tilted her head, her brows furrowed in curiosity. "Wait," she said sharply. "You two know each other?" Darcy's knees almost gave out. Memories flickered. Late afternoons in high school, laughter under bleachers, a boy with ambition who'd sworn he'd build empires. And here he was, standing in the marble glow of his empire, looking at her like he'd seen a ghost. "I didn't think I'd ever—" His voice trailed off, and he pressed a hand against the doorway as if bracing himself.
"Darcy, you used to work the diner," she whispered. "And then—"
"Life got messy." She forced a nervous smile that trembled at the edges.
Guess you made it." The woman in red folded her arms, watching them both carefully, her stylish coat catching the soft glow of chandelier light. "Ethan," she said, her tone clipped.
"What's going on here?" He turned his head slowly toward her, but his eyes didn't lose their focus on Darcy. "She was someone important to me. Before all this." His gesture swept vaguely around the mansion. Darcy felt heat flood her cheeks. She looked down, embarrassed by her shoes with their torn seams, the way her hands shook from exhaustion. She wanted to vanish into the polished floor. But Ethan stepped closer, his voice lowering.
"Darcy, what happened?"
The question cracked something inside her. She tried to hold herself upright, but her lips quivered, her chest tightened.
"After Mom died, everything unraveled.
Rent, bills, school, I couldn't hold it together.
I've been—"
Trying, shelters, odd jobs, sometimes counting coins just to get instant noodles. My fridge.
Her voice broke.
It's empty except for a jar of mustard.
And an eviction notice is taped to my door. Her words filled the hall like a confession, raw and unbearable.
The woman in red shifted uncomfortably, her confident smirk fading into something softer, though she stayed silent. Ethan's jaw clenched as if the weight of her reality landed squarely on him. He exhaled slowly, then shook his head. You shouldn't even be here asking for food in exchange for scrubbing floors. His eyes, sharp yet full of conflict, locked with hers. You deserved so much more. Darcy tried to laugh, but it came out as a brittle sound. Deserve doesn't put food on the table, the woman in red finally spoke, her voice steadier now. She's been working.
And she's good at it. Darcy glanced at her, startled by the faint note of approval.
The woman met her eyes, and for the first time there wasn't pity, just recognition of effort. Ethan turned, pacing briefly, running a hand through his hair. Darcy, listen.
I can help. Not just with a meal.
With more.
A job, a safe place to stay.
You shouldn't be out there counting bus tickets while the rain soaks through your shoes. Her lips parted in disbelief. She gripped the backpack tighter, her knuckles whitening.
I don't want charity. It's not charity, he said firmly, his tone sharpening.
It's a chance.
And you've earned that just by surviving everything life's thrown at you. The woman in red raised a brow. Are you sure about this, Ethan? She's been through a lot.
It won't be simple. His gaze softened as he looked back at Darcy. Nothing worth it ever is. Darcy's vision blurred with unshed tears. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let them spill.
I don't even know how to
accept that.
All I wanted was one plate of food. Ethan stepped closer until his presence warmed the cold edges of her despair.
And take the food.
And the work. And maybe, just maybe, let someone stand beside you this time. For the first time in years, Darcy's shoulders eased.
Not entirely, but enough. She let out a shaky breath and whispered, Okay. Over the next days, the mansion became less foreign. Darcy still scrubbed and polished, but Ethan often lingered, asking about small details, memories, dreams she once had. The woman in red, whose name Darcy learned was Lena, tested her constantly, checking corners for dust, smudges on mirrors, but eventually offered a half smile when Darcy met her impossible standards. One evening, Ethan returned from a business trip carrying not a briefcase of contracts, but 2 bags of groceries. He set them on the counter in front of Darcy. For your fridge? He said simply. Darcy's throat tightened as she opened the bags. Bread, milk, vegetables, real food she hadn't seen in weeks. You didn't have to, I know, he said gently, but I wanted to. That night, alone in her tiny apartment, she placed each item carefully on the shelf of her fridge. The bulb flickered as always, but for once the shelves weren't bare. She stood there staring at the groceries, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, until she laughed through them, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. Ethan's help didn't erase the pain of the past. It didn't magically solve every hardship, but it cracked open a door. She found herself standing straighter, her steps a little lighter, her eyes meeting others with less shame. Weeks later, at the mansion, Ethan caught her pausing again in front of the mirror in the hallway. This time, she didn't see only the girl with torn shoes. She saw someone who could rebuild, someone still dignified despite everything. He stepped behind her reflection, meeting her gaze in the glass.
See, he said quietly.
Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see you again. Darcy turned, her lips trembling into a smile that was fragile but real.
And sometimes, she whispered, all it takes is one plate of food. The moral lingered in the air,
as soft as the fading light. One act of generosity can reroute a life.
And every single one of us carries that power.